Hello there, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube, the internet, and the like, and welcome back to Team Fortress 2. Today, I'm going to be playing as the Team Physician, and I'm using the Crusader's Crossbow, the Vaccinator, and the Bone Saw. And what we're going to be talking about in this video is, of course, the Vaccinator. First of all, I sincerely apologize for putting this video off Mediscout, because I know, a long time ago, you requested that I use this medigun in one of my videos, and I said, oh yeah, as soon as I get one, I'll get around to doing it, woohoo! I never got around to doing it, and I've just been putting it off for the longest time. To be honest, using the Vaccinator has kind of been a personal fear for me, a vaxophobia, because I've always felt like this medigun would just leave a bad taste in my mouth in the end. I've always kind of feared that I just wouldn't be able to put it to effective use. One thing I have discovered while using the Vaccinator, when I actually decide to sit down and properly give it the chance it deserved, I discovered that it really is good in the correct situation, and that correct situation being, it's a pockets medigun. So, let's cover a little history before we get into more detail about that. For a while, when the Vaccinator was first added, the resistance changing button used to be mapped at mouse 3, and new medics were often confused by the concept of using the middle mouse button, so they would always stick with the bullet resistance. Eventually, Valve decided to give it a crit resistance buff, hoping that it would be used more often, and it didn't get used more often. It was just kind of neglected for the longest time. Then eventually, they gave the resistance changing button a different key. They mapped it to the reloading key, and that became especially useful because mouse 3 is what I use for voice communication in TF2. Granted, I don't use it all the time, but I just don't really like changing it that much. I do still see a couple of new medics struggling to use this medigun, but hopefully, while I go through this video discussing about how to use the resistance and, well, how I personally use the resistance, then maybe you can get a general sense of how this medigun specifically works, and why it works with a pocket only. So, let's talk about the resistance. It's vital to point out that using the 3 types of resistance is all completely situational. You are the perceiver of which resistance is the most important in a battle. It's all based on your knowledge of what map you're playing on, and how much of a threat your enemies are going to be. For example, if I see a group of enemies that include a pyro, I know that there are 2 instincts that pyros will have. They'll either A, try to make a beeline towards me and my pocket to set us on fire, or they'll attempt to flank us. Now, if a pyro is attempting to flank you, you might want to either keep that fire damage resistance on standby, depending on what the map you're playing on is, or you should just keep a different resistance in mind and just wait for the pyro to come to you. And of course, team communication isn't bad to try out. If you think a pyro is going to be an extreme threat, then it's probably best that you communicate with your team by voice, or even text chat if you have enough time. Now, soldiers and demomen are a bit of a different story because they tend to keep at medium range, with the only possible exception being soldiers who are practically kamikazes with rocket launchers at close range. If my pocket and I are at a relative distance from all explosive classes and generally all enemies, I would pick the explosive damage resistance over anything. And lastly, we have the bullet-based classes, and they can vary between short, medium, and long range, because you have scouts, which really love to do jumping jacks around you and your target. If that scout is isolated, he's pretty easily manageable, I would imagine, especially if you're pocketing a heavy, but you'd still better be using the bullet resistance either way, because if he's just up close and personal while your heavy is distracted, you might want to just sort of tap the heavy on the shoulder and let him know, oh hey, there's a scout, like, blasting a million pellets into your body. Now, with heavies, if they're at long range, they're virtually no threat. It's as simple as that. Like, the minigun does pitiful damage at long range. It might be irritating, but it's really no threat, and there are probably better resistances you could be using in that situation. If the heavy is at medium range, bullet resistance all the way, and if the heavy is at close range, you're probably dead if you haven't switched to bullet resistance already. And lastly, we have snipers, where if you're in a bit of a tough jam, and you know that a sniper is on the other side of the map attempting to headshot you, the medic, bear in mind it does not hurt to use a mini Uber to save your own skin, because if you use bullet damage resistance and an Uber with that, headshots deal like 13 damage. It's absolutely pathetic. So don't be afraid to pop an Uber if you feel as though you're at a personal risk. So you can use this to change your position on the map, and you'll probably avoid being sniped in general. And that's very, very good. So, that's pretty much all that needs to be covered about how you deal with certain classes. The only exceptions what I've left out would probably have to be engineers and spies, and other medics for that matter. With engineers, you mostly just have to expect to use bullet resistance because sentry guns, they're just going to be using bullets all the time, with the possible exceptions of rockets, but the bullets definitely deal a substantial amount of damage because of the fast firing rate on sentry guns. With medics, I think their mediguns, like, not their mediguns, but their syringe guns, I think those are counted as bullets, so you could probably use the bullet resistance against that if they're peppering you from a distance. And with spies, you just gotta look out for spies as if you would look out for spies in general. If they're using the ambassador and trying to headshot you, it probably does not hurt to use the bullet resistance. Using the miniature Ubers of the Vaccinator are all entirely up to you, and what you see is the largest threat in a fight. They take very little time to build, and they're inherently disposable if you yourself are in personal danger. If you do have more than one Uber, but you only want to use a single Uber for a certain resistance, all you have to do is just press the button once. If you do want to use more than one Uber for that type of resistance, hold in the button, and that's all you need to know. The only other thing I can think of mentioning is that you cannot switch resistance in the middle of an Uber, so remember to choose wisely. And also, one key factor about all mediguns in general: pop it, don't drop it. If anyone else remembers that team service announcement, if you're going to die, do it in style. Don't give the enemy team extra points, because every single Uber you build with the Vaccinator will count as a full Uber. So if you die with 4 full Ubers, that guy who killed you will get 4 extra bonus points, and just don't give him the credit. He doesn't deserve it. Now for my closing thoughts on the Vaccinator, I know that I mostly spoke strictly about how it works best when using a pocket only. If you're trying to keep your teammates alive using the Vaccinator, it can be a bit of a mess, because you're going to have to constantly switch damage resistance types against what sources of damage are coming from, and what classes are taking different sources of damage, and it all becomes confusing, and it's so much more manageable if you're just pocketing one class. If you must be a single medic on the team, I would advise you use a different medigun, because it would just be a lot more effective. If you're going to be the second medic on the team, then I would suggest you look for a pocket and you use the Vaccinator. It does wonders. So, thank you guys very much for watching. Have a great day or evening, and I guess I will see you in the next video. Bye.